May 8, 1945. The forests of northern Germany fall silent for the first time in years. In a muddy clearing near Flensburg, a Tiger I tank sits abandoned, its 88mm gun pointed at nothing. The crew is gone. The engine, once a roaring beast that struck terror across battlefields from Normandy to the Eastern Front, is cold. Inside the turret, empty shell casings roll across the floor with each gust of wind. The smell of diesel and gunpowder still clings to the steel. Across Europe, hundreds of these mechanical giants stand frozen in their final positions. Some are buried to their turrets in Russian mud. Others block French village streets, track links shattered, armour scorched black. A few sit perfectly intact in German motor pools, waiting for orders that will never come. The Tiger tank was the most feared weapon of the Second World War. Its very name made Allied tank crews grip their controls tighter. But when the guns fell silent, these steel monsters faced a different kind of battle, one against time, scrap dealers, and forgotten memories. The war was over, but a new mystery was just beginning. What really happened to the German Tiger tanks after the guns fell silent? The Tiger tank wasn't just another weapon, it was a legend forged in combat, a 60-ton nightmare that could destroy Allied tanks from distances they couldn't even return fire. Between 1942 and 1945, Germany produced approximately 1,347 Tiger I tanks and 492 Tiger II tanks. That's fewer than 1,900 machines total. Compare this to the over 49,000 Sherman tanks America built, or the 58,000 T-34s that rolled off Soviet assembly lines. The Tiger was rare, expensive, and utterly devastating. Each one cost 300,000 Reichsmarks to build, twice the price of a Panther tank, and 6 times that of a standard Panzer IV. These machines earned their reputation in blood. A single Tiger could hold off entire tank battalions. Their 88mm guns could punch through Allied armour at ranges exceeding 2 kilometres. Their frontal armour was nearly impenetrable to most Allied tank guns. Crews who faced them developed a psychological fear that lasted long after the war ended. The Tiger represented the pinnacle of German engineering and the desperation of a losing war. But fame and fear couldn't save them from what came next. When the surrender documents were signed, approximately 150 Tiger tanks still existed in various conditions across Europe. Some were operational, most were damaged. All of them immediately became prizes in a continent-wide treasure hunt. Within hours of Germany's capitulation, Allied soldiers were swarming over abandoned German positions. The Americans wanted technology. The British wanted trophies. The Soviets wanted everything they could carry back to Moscow. The race to claim the Tigers had begun. In the British sector, engineers moved quickly. They had been studying captured Tigers since 1943, when they recovered Tiger 131 in Tunisia. Now they had access to dozens more. British recovery teams fanned out across northern Germany with one mission: find every operational or repairable Tiger and ship it back to England for analysis. The Americans did the same, loading Tigers onto flatbed rail cars bound for ports. One Tiger I was discovered in a factory in Kassel, completely intact, never issued to a unit. American engineers started it up and drove it out of the building. The engine turned over on the first try. The Soviets took a different approach. They stripped everything. In the eastern zones, Red Army salvage teams descended on German tank depots like locusts. They didn't care about preserving history or studying technology they had already defeated. They wanted the metal. Steel was currency in a devastated Soviet Union. Every tiger they found was measured not in historical value, but in tons of scrap. The cutting torches came out within days. Imagine walking through a former Wehrmacht depot in June 1945. The smell of acetylene fills the air. Soviet workers in coveralls cut through tiger armor with blue-white flames. The metal screams as it yields. But not all tigers were accessible. Hundreds had been destroyed in combat, their hulks scattered across former battlefields. In Normandy, tigers sat rusting in hedgerows, blown apart by Allied air attacks. In Poland, they lay in fields where they'd been abandoned when fuel ran out. These wrecks became landmarks. French farmers ploughed around them, Belgian children played on them. The hulks were too heavy for local scrap dealers to move, too expensive to cut apart without industrial equipment. They stayed where they died, slowly sinking into the earth. Some tigers simply vanished. In the chaos of defeat, German crews hid their vehicles rather than surrender them. They drove tigers into barns and covered them with hay. They rolled them into forests and camouflaged them with branches. They sank them in rivers and lakes, thinking perhaps they might return for them someday. Others were deliberately destroyed by their own crews. Officers ordered the detonation of internal charges to prevent capture. The explosions left turrets blown 20 meters from their hulls, armor plates peeled back like flower petals. The tigers died not in glorious battle, but in quiet acts of denial. Within 6 months, the organized destruction began. The Allies established massive vehicle collection points across occupied Germany. In the British zone near Hamburg, a field the size of 50 football pitches became a graveyard for German armor. Tigers sat in long rows alongside Panthers, Sturmgeschütze, and half-tracks. Military bulldozers pushed them into piles. Then came the American scrap dealers, civilian contractors who had won bids to recycle German military equipment. They brought industrial crushers mounted on rail cars. The machines could compress a Tiger tank into a cube of scrap metal, measuring 2 meters on each side. The sound was unforgettable. Veterans who worked the scrapyards in 1946 later described the groaning of steel, the sharp cracks as welds failed, the grinding of the crushers' hydraulic rams. A Tiger that had survived battles from Kursk to Berlin would be reduced to raw material in less than 20 minutes. The metal was sorted, loaded onto freight trains, and shipped to blast furnaces across Europe. Within 2 years, hundreds of Tigers had been melted down. Their steel became rebar for reconstruction projects. Former instruments of war now reinforced the foundations of hospitals, schools, and apartment blocks rising from the rubble. But destruction wasn't the only fate. Some Tigers found new purpose. The French army, desperate to rebuild its armored forces, claimed every operational German tank it could find. French crews trained on captured Panthers and Tigers in 1946. The irony was not lost on anyone. Tanks that had rolled through Paris in 1940 under German command now bore French tricolour markings. The French used these Tigers primarily for training and evaluation. They wanted to understand how Germany had built such effective machines. By 1947, most had been retired, their mechanical complexity making them too expensive to maintain. The British kept Tigers running longer. At the Bovington Tank Museum testing grounds, British engineers conducted extensive trials. They wanted to understand everything: armour composition, gun performance, transmission design, the placement of every bolt. One Tiger 1 underwent live fire testing. British gunners fired every type of Allied anti-tank weapon at it from various ranges, documenting what could penetrate and what couldn't. The tank absorbed dozens of hits before the tests concluded. That same Tiger, riddled with test holes, now sits in the Bovington collection, its scars telling the story of post-war military research. The Soviets had their own plans. In early 1946, Red Army testing facilities near Kubinka received multiple Tiger I and Tiger II tanks in working condition. Soviet engineers conducted firing trials, mechanical stress tests, and metallurgical analysis. They disassembled every component, photographed every part, and measured every dimension. The Soviets were designing their own heavy tanks, and the Tiger provided valuable lessons in what to emulate and what to avoid. These test Tigers survived because they remained useful. When testing concluded, they were preserved as reference examples and eventually became museum pieces. Then there are the stories that sound like fiction, but are documented fact. In 1956, a French farmer near Caen was excavating a pond on his property when his equipment struck something metallic. He had found a Tiger I deliberately sunk in 1944 by its retreating crew. The tank had sat underwater for 12 years. When recovery crews finally pulled it out, they found the interior remarkably preserved. Personal items still sat where the crew had left them: a leather map case, cigarette tins, even a photograph of a woman tucked behind the gunner's visor. The farmer sold the Tiger to a scrap dealer. It was cut apart within a week. Another Tiger I was discovered in 1999 in a swamp near Leningrad, now St. Petersburg. Russian recovery specialists had been searching for it based on German wartime records that indicated a Tiger had been lost in that area during the 1943 siege. Using ground-penetrating radar and historical maps, they located it buried under 3 meters of mud and water. The recovery took weeks. When the Tiger finally emerged, it was a relic frozen in time. The gun was still loaded. Shell casings littered the floor. The engine was seized solid, but the armor showed why Tigers were feared. Multiple impact marks from Soviet guns, none of which had penetrated. Some Tigers never left the battlefield. In the Falaise pocket in Normandy, a Tiger I destroyed during the Allied encirclement in August 1944 remained in a field until 1962. The farmer who owned the land couldn't move it and couldn't plough around it, so it simply sat there, slowly rusting. Children from the nearby village visited it regularly. They climbed through the hatches and pretended to be tank commanders. Eventually, a museum in Normandy arranged for its removal. The recovery required 3 heavy-duty cranes. The Tiger had sunk so deep into the Norman soil that its weight had created a depression 2 meters deep. Perhaps the strangest fate befell a Tiger II discovered by British forces in 1945 at the Henschel factory where these tanks were built. This particular Tiger had been modified for promotional filming. It featured additional armor plates welded at odd angles to make it look even more imposing on camera. Nazi propaganda units had used it in training films and newsreels. After the war, British intelligence kept it for several years, studying the propaganda modifications. Eventually, it was shipped to England and later to the United States for display. American audiences who viewed it had no idea they were looking at a propaganda prop, not a genuine combat vehicle. The Americans conducted their own unique experiments. In 1952, the United States Army obtained a Tiger I for nuclear weapons testing at the Nevada test site. Engineers wanted to understand how armored vehicles would withstand atomic blast effects. The Tiger was positioned at a specific distance from a detonation point, along with American tanks and other vehicles. When the bomb detonated, the overpressure wave threw the 60-ton Tiger several meters through the air. The armor held, but the internal components were destroyed by the shock. The radioactive hulk was buried in a marked grave in the Nevada desert, where it remains today, slowly decaying beneath the sand. By 1950, fewer than 20 Tigers were known to exist worldwide. The rest had been destroyed, scrapped, or lost. Museums began recognizing their historical value. The British carefully preserved several examples at Bovington. The Soviets maintained their Kubinka collection. The French kept one Tiger I at the Musée des Blindés in Saumur. But most Tigers had simply disappeared. Scrap metal prices in post-war Europe were high, and a Tiger represented tons of valuable steel. Economic necessity trumped historical preservation. Then, decades later, the searches began. In the 1970s and 1980s, military historians and collectors started hunting for lost Tigers. They used German military records, veteran interviews, and aerial reconnaissance photographs. They searched forests, drained ponds, and excavated fields. In 1975, a Tiger I was recovered from the bottom of a river in Russia. In 1982, another was found buried in a landfill in Germany, partially crushed but identifiable. Each discovery made headlines in military history circles. Each recovery was a race against time and corrosion. The most remarkable recovery occurred in 2000 in Estonia. A Tiger I had been driven onto a frozen lake in 1944 during the German retreat. The ice broke, and the tank sank in 12 meters of water. Soviet authorities knew it was there, but lacked the equipment to recover it. 56 years later, Estonian divers located it using sonar. The recovery operation took months. When the Tiger finally surfaced, it was in astonishing condition. Cold, oxygen-poor water had preserved it. The rubber periscope seals were intact. The paint was still visible. Even some of the internal mechanisms could be moved. This Tiger is now fully restored and operational, one of only 7 running Tigers in the world. Today, approximately 10 to 12 genuine Tiger I tanks survive in various conditions. Another 6 to 8 Tiger II tanks still exist. That's fewer than 20 machines from the original 1,900. Most are in museums: Bovington in England, Kubinka in Russia, Saumur in France, the German Tank Museum in Munster, and the US Army Ordnance Museum. A handful are in private collections owned by wealthy enthusiasts who spend fortunes maintaining them. Running a Tiger for even 1 hour requires extensive mechanical knowledge and costs thousands in fuel and maintenance. The few restored to operating condition appear at military shows, where crowds gather to hear the distinctive roar of their Maybach engines. The search continues. Right now, historians believe at least 50 Tigers remain undiscovered. They rest at the bottom of European rivers and lakes. They're buried in forests where retreating crews abandoned them. They sit in the ruins of buildings in Eastern Europe, forgotten and overgrown. Occasionally, construction projects unearth fragments. A turret discovered during highway construction in Poland, a hull found during building demolition in Berlin. Each discovery adds a piece to the puzzle, but most Tigers are gone forever. Their steel repurposed, their histories erased. The fate of the Tiger tanks reflects a larger truth about the end of the war. These machines represented the peak of German military technology, symbols of a regime that believed in total war and industrial supremacy. When that regime collapsed, the symbols had to be dealt with. Some were preserved for study, some were destroyed out of necessity, and some simply faded away. The tigers that survive today are ghosts, remnants of a conflict that reshaped the world. They sit behind velvet ropes in climate-controlled museums, their guns permanently disabled, their engines silent except for rare demonstrations. But their legend outlived the steel. The Tiger tank occupies a unique place in military history, feared by those who faced it and respected by those who study warfare. Its post-war fate, scattered across continents and decades, mirrors the scattered fate of the Third Reich itself. Some pieces were preserved, most were destroyed. All of it became history. When you stand before a tiger today, you're not just looking at a tank. You're looking at the physical manifestation of total war, the desperation of a losing cause, and the strange amnesia that follows every conflict when the instruments of death become museum curiosities. The tigers are gone now, reduced from 1,900 machines to fewer than 20 survivors. They ended not in glorious battle, but in scrapyards and swamps, rivers and test sites, museums and forgotten fields. Their story after 1945 is the story of how we process trauma, how we preserve memory, and how quickly the machinery of war becomes obsolete. The last Tiger rolled off the production line in August 1944. By 1950, they were already relics. By 1970, they were treasures. Today, they are witnesses, silent steel monuments to an era when the world tore itself apart and had to rebuild from the wreckage, one melted tank at a time.